All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. My guest is William Allen, and he will be leading this session for us. And William is an author with a writer's heart and a researcher's mind. After getting a degree in psychology with an eye on doing psychology research, he recalibrated for a career in information technology. He found himself in a 30-year career as an information technology manager at Wells Fargo, who enjoyed managing highly intelligent, often difficult staff, many of whom were highly sensitive. He retired early from his corporate job to start his hypno coaching and neurofeedback brain training business, Brain Pilots, in Bend, Oregon. In late 2016, he began his blog, The Sensitive Man, about his experiences as a highly sensitive man. The blog became the genesis of his first book, Confessions of a Sensitive Man, and his new book, On Being a Sensitive Man, is the follow-up book, which focuses on how to live in the world as a sensitive man. He feels that HSP males need to take their keen insights and intuition and make them public. He would like to shed more light on highly sensitive males and the much needed role they need to take in our society. So, with all that being said, I'm just so glad to meet you and so glad to have you here. How's everything going for you today?
Thanks, Josh, for the intro. Yeah, everything's going great. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Awesome. It's so great to have you. And I thought, if you're okay with it, where we would start is I was wondering if you could share a little bit of your HSP origin story with us. So maybe when and how you found out you were a highly sensitive person, and how that discovery has impacted your life and relationships.
Okay, that is a great place to start. I first discovered, like so many people, about this trait by reading Dr. Elaine Aron's book on high sensitivity, the first one. I didn't get a hold of the original copies. I mean, the around the original time she had released it in '96, but I started reading the book probably about 2005 or so. I got it through a newsletter. Somebody referred it to me, and I picked it up. I thought, oh, this is intriguing, but I'm not sure about the sensitive business.
Yeah.
So I picked the book up. I started reading it, and of course, it was checking every box just perfectly for me. But I struggled with it. One of the things about being raised, I was raised in the southeastern United States, which is probably one of the most conservative places in the country, where traditional masculinity kind of rules the day. And I had been told too many times over the course of my life that I was too sensitive, and it became ingrained in me that that wasn't a good thing to be.
Mhm.
So reading a book about sensitivity just didn't exactly light up, the engines here. So I put it down for a while. I was still working my corporate job. It was always in the back of my mind, but I just had a really hard time embracing it. When I retired early from Wells Fargo in about 2011, I started a small business where I was working with people, the hypno coaching business, what I call hypno coaching and neurofeedback. And that was great. And I was meeting people one on one. And I was noticing that so many of the people that were coming in were highly sensitive people. They sort of fit that mold. And it was easy to work with them because we could relate, because of our personalities.
Mhm.
Um, about 2016, I decided I always wanted to write something. And I decided I wanted to write a blog. And I looked around on the internet. I was looking for blogs about highly sensitive men. There were very few, very few. There's a couple of that were out there, but they weren't being kept up, and they weren't writing them enough. So I decided I would write a blog, and I would ask questions that I wanted to have answered. And I started this blog, The Sensitive Man, in 2016. And it just started sort of blossoming because more and more questions, the more I wrote, the more questions I had. So I had to do research and so forth. And so I compiled this list of blogs that I had written about this. And of course, eventually it culminated in writing the first book, Confessions of a Sensitive Man. And actually, I had wrote both books at the same time. So by the time I started writing the blogs, Josh, I was starting to put my arms around this thing and say, you know what, you can fight this all you want, but at the end of the day, this is who you are. And you might as well embrace it at some point and just accept it. And that writing that blog, and I advise anyone, especially highly sensitive men, if this is something that you're struggling with, it's good to try to get it down on paper or get it on a blog or get it somewhere where you're writing out your feelings and what you're thinking about and so forth, because it really helped me. And by the time I got to writing the book, I was like all in on being sensitive man and accepting it. And it's really affected my life in a positive way. And the reason I say it was a positive way, because it's allowed me to be who I am. Instead of wearing a mask and being somebody else and not accepting my sensitivity, I've come to the point where I've started to accept it. And when you do that, your confidence goes up, your self-esteem goes up, and it's affected me in just so many different positive ways. I've met so many great people around the world who are highly sensitive, and I really feel like I belong to something, a group, especially a group of people who understand me and I understand them. It does affect relationships, there's no question about it. A lot of, say on the romantic relationship side, there's a lot of women that don't particularly like sensitive men. That's something you're just going to run into. And I've always said, and I always wrote, that highly sensitive men just need to be selective in who they partner with, because you want to be happy, you want to be accepted. So you're going to be a little different. So you may have to find someone who accepts that kind of thing. It may be a little more work, but it's well worth it when you do find people who accept you that way. So all in all, it's been a very positive experience the last couple of years. I have, like I said, felt like I found my niche, and I'm happy about it.
Awesome. That's almost just a master class in and of itself that you've shared already. And I appreciate you sharing every single point. So much value there. And especially for me, being maybe a little bit behind you on the journey of discovering that I was a highly sensitive person and what that means and what that looks like and how to embrace that. There's just so much that you shared that resonates on a deep level. And especially, like you said, that one of the biggest things is just the community of highly sensitive men and highly sensitive people in general that I've found, especially through LinkedIn, where it is just so refreshing to know that we're not alone, to know that we're not broken or weird or damaged in some way, that we are different, but it's a wonderful difference in terms of how we're wired and what that looks like from day to day. And so it really has been an incredible journey for me as well. But seeing somebody a little bit further down the road is just refreshing and exciting as well. And I appreciate the work that you're doing, the blogs, your newsletter that you send out each week. I love getting that and seeing what's new, and the way that you've kept your pulse on the HSP, your finger on the pulse of the HSP movement in general, but also just the support that you offer people, and the way that you, in so many ways, have answered questions that many of us are just arriving at, and you've kind of left those clues for us in terms of those of us who are a little bit behind you on the journey. And it's an amazing resource to have. And I'm excited to explore your books. I've not gotten into those yet, but they're on my list. They're saved as some of my next purchases, because again, there's just so much value and so much insight and so much wisdom that you're sharing. And so I appreciate you having the courage to go down this road and to raise your voice and raise awareness around the subject when so many people had that opportunity but weren't really doing that. And when you saw the need there and you were willing to step up and fill that, I think that takes tremendous courage. And I just applaud you and thank you for all the work that you've done up to this point. And with that in mind, I'm just excited for what you'll share today as well.
Thank you so much, Josh. I'm humbled by the great accolades you've imparted on me here, and I appreciate that. And I really truly believe that we're all working at this together. So doesn't matter where you are on the journey, as long as you're on the journey. That's really what matters.
Absolutely, I totally agree. All right. Well, I know today we wanted to dive into the topic for our interview is 10 important elements in raising HSP boys. And I thought real quick before we dive into the 10 points, would just, I was curious why this topic stood out to you, why you wanted to share on this one, and how it relates maybe to your personal life, and the elements that you want to bring in from your own story, or from your raising children as well.
Yeah. Um, this really I'm very passionate about this one thing that I think is really important. And that is that it's very important that we HSP males, grown men, become role models and to be sort of the heroes for our HSP boys. They don't always have role models to look to. They don't always have, a blueprint for how to be an HSP male. So to me, having grown up, as I said before, in a culture that was very traditional, and did not value high sensitivity, and especially in males, this was important that I think that we talk about this, because the future really is our HSP boys that are out there now, and they need guidance, they need help. I know what it was like. You know what it was like. All HSP men know what it was like to go through childhood, kind of wondering, well, I'm different, but what's wrong with me? And usually the feedback highly sensitive boys get is very often pejorative and negative. And we want to make sure that people are understanding that HSP boys may seem on the surface to be fragile, but they're not. They just need direction. They just need support. They need nurturing. They need guidance. And when that happens, well, as I had in the points there, good things happen to highly sensitive children that grow up in good, nurturing, and supporting environments. And so this is something that I think is very important. Now, there's some great books out there. I want to let people know about that. One that was written by Dr. Ted Zeff, and if you can find anything written by Dr. Zeff, who passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately, but left behind a legacy of great books on raising HSP boys and on HSP men. Tracy Cooper's written some great books on high sensitivity in men. Elaine Aaron, Dr. Aaron, has written books on raising HSP children. So that's kind of the technical in the weeds kind of stuff, but the stuff that I talk about is more experiential. This is what I surmised from growing up, the things that I think that I missed from my parents, and there's nothing that I'm sliding against my parents. They just didn't know. And both of them were highly sensitive. They just didn't know how to raise a highly sensitive boy. Yeah. And so I had two highly sensitive sons that I've raised as well. And I made mistakes too, but I learned from that. And they taught me because I was aware of their sensitivity. So I think for a lot of people, parents, whether they're highly sensitive parents or they're not highly sensitive, but they do have a highly sensitive son, there's just some roadmap things that you need to look at as you're raising those children. And I again, the impacts that you have on those children now, especially sensitive kids, because they're so perceptive, they're so aware of things, and they sense and pick up things that other kids miss because of their sensitivity. And that can be a two-edged sword. And you want to raise them in a way that they grow up to be confident in themselves, genuine and authentic, and self-aware of who they are, and feel good about themselves.
That's awesome. And it's an amazing cause, and I'm definitely passionate about it as well. And I think, like you said, to me, the question has popped in my mind at different times of what would life have looked like if I had found out that I was highly sensitive sooner, and if I had come to understand what that meant earlier in life. And so I think any efforts that we can take to share this message and to get it in front of a younger audience, when they're ready for it, and to, like you said, especially get the message out to parents who are raising highly sensitive boys, just so they have a way of understanding their sensitive child. And like you're talking about, and especially what we'll cover here in just a moment, having that roadmap and having an instruction manual of sorts, or at least a place to start, to understand why their child may be different than their peers, but especially to answer some of those questions that their child may have, as far as, why am I different? Why don't my peers have the same keen sense of injustice that I have? Why are they so excited about getting in these rough and tumble things, but I prefer to sit back and watch and learn? Why do I feel different from everyone else? And I think for each of us, we've had those questions as children, but maybe didn't have parents who knew the answer to that, or understood, with the high sensitivity side of things. And so I think any resources that we can get into the hands of parents and children, who are growing up in that, it's just absolutely incredible. And so I appreciate the work you've done in terms of raising awareness, but also I'm just excited to dive into this, with you, these 10 important elements in raising HSP boys, because I think many of the people who are watching the summit and on this journey with us will benefit from these points. So I noticed the first one you had was, avoid trying to quote unquote normalize HSP boys. Do you want to dive into that?
Yeah, I think this is really important. And again, I just want to say, this isn't just for parents. I mean, people who deal with children, teachers, coaches, anybody that deals with children on a regular basis could learn from this, especially in identifying highly sensitive boys. But
Absolutely.
this is something I think a lot of times fathers make this mistake more than anything else. They want their son to be kind of like the normal boy, right? Like you were mentioning a minute ago. How come he doesn't like getting out in the rough? And why does he like wrestling with his peers, his friends? What is it about him that he doesn't like to be involved in certain activities, sports, and so forth, and the rough and tumble? They think, and I think sometimes misguidedly, they think that if I can get him to be more normal, and I use air quotes there, that he won't have as difficult a time. My dad did that to me. He was a highly sensitive man, and I think he saw in me the same struggles he had as a child, and he was trying so desperately to get me away from that. So he wanted to make me more normal, or normalize me, which is basically about being like the norm that we have for what we call the boy code, certain things that we expect from a child, masculine kind of traits and so forth and so on. And I think that's really, really unfortunate, because all it's going to do in the end is frustrate your son. And it's going to make them feel like they're inadequate or they're inferior. And the idea here is to let them experience their life as a highly sensitive person, because it's going to be a unique journey. And so this idea of trying to say, okay, I want my son to be like everybody else, so he won't be, quote, different and be bullied and be ridiculed and ostracized and so forth and so on. Maybe it was a good intent, but it's really not the way, I think, to bring up an HSP boy. And there are other points that as we go down the list, that will show why that's not a good way of doing this.
Yeah, well, that's a great place to start, and I think you're absolutely right in terms of how often that's done with the best intentions. Fathers or parents do that for their children with the best of intentions, and yet the message that it communicates so often is that there's something wrong with me, I don't fit in. And like I mentioned before, messages that we can interpret from that in terms of, am I damaged, am I broken, am I weird, is there something wrong with me? And so I totally agree that I don't think it's ever done out of an intent to harm the child involved, but it does, the messages that we can derive from that without further explanation can be dangerous or harmful in the long run, or just make it more difficult to travel on this journey and come to a place of self-acceptance. And so that's a great place to start. I appreciate you going into that. So the next thing we wanted to talk about, or next point that you were going to make, I believe, is teaching HSP boys to regulate their emotions. And I'm really excited to hear what you recommend in that area.
Yeah. Well, we all know that highly sensitive people are very emotional people. We feel very deeply, and there's nothing wrong with that. And this isn't about teaching them emotional suppression, which is not what this is about. Emotional regulation is, in my estimation, and of course, Dr. Aaron also talks about emotional regulation being something that all HSPs should learn as well. It's about how you ride the emotional wave that we have. We sometimes have these waves of emotion, and learning techniques and tools and things that could be taught at a young age. I mean, even 4 and 5-year-olds can learn some of that. They may not have the full comprehension of what's going on, but they can learn to, when they are overwhelmed, to rest, and relax. And there are techniques you can teach them. I'll talk about that in a second. But the idea here is that it's like a fire hose sometimes with us. We have these emotional waves. Now, a fire hose is a useful tool, especially you're putting fires out, but it's also something that's under pressure and can, if it's not controlled, sort of regulated, if you will, it gets out of control and can be harmful at some point. So what we want to be able to do is teach them how to experience emotions, let them flow through them, not suppress them. That's not a good thing. But the idea is to be able to let those things through. And it's almost like riding a wave. If you're surfing, the wave is very powerful. You almost let the wave take you, but you ride the wave through. And if you don't, what happens, the consequence of that is the wave will overtake you. And that isn't always a good thing. So what we want to do is sort of teach our kids to be able to flow with the emotion that we have, but manage it as we can so that it doesn't get so overwhelming that we lose control of who we are. That's not something that's unreasonable. Things that I often recommend people do, as adults do, is things like meditation, learning mindfulness techniques, using calming techniques like breathing exercises, using visualization, things like that. Now, if you scale that down to a child's level, you can take those same things and you can teach a child simple things like breathing techniques that can help them calm themselves. And what that teaches them to do is not to be fearful of having these emotional waves, but it gives them the sense that they can control that, experience it in a controlled way that's safe and secure for them. So these are things that we should be teaching our children very young. And a lot of parents I know, when they see these sort of emotional outbursts from their highly sensitive children, I think they go back and think something is wrong and they kind of back away from it. But the idea is to meet your child where they're at that age level they are, and start to teach them these things. Like I said, there's some very simple, there's probably some really good books out there about how to teach that to children, and especially at younger ages. But I think it's very important to teach that to them while they're young. As they grow up, they'll always have that skill. And that's going to be important as they go into adulthood.
Absolutely. That's great. And I love those analogies and some of those exercises that you recommended, and especially the way you suggested the same things that work for HSP men are great for HSP boys. You just have to communicate in a way that's age appropriate that they can take on. So along that same line, the next point you had was providing gentle challenges for growth. What do you mean by that?
Okay, well, I have a kind of a different way of looking at things like comfort zone. I think growth is something that if you don't grow in life, life is about growing. And if you're not growing, you're slowly dying. So I think the idea is that we have to teach our children early on that there are going to be challenges in life and that they are capable and very able to be able to meet those challenges. I look at the comfort zone like this. Everybody talks about going outside the comfort zone. I look at it differently, maybe because I'm an HSP, of this idea of pushing the comfort zone out,
Oh,
right?
wow. Okay.
To absorb experiences. So instead of saying, I'm going to leave the comfort zone, I'm going to go try something new, and then I'm going to jump back in the comfort zone. To me, that doesn't seem to make sense. What I think would make more sense, and I'm not suggesting that we always live in the comfort zone, but if you look at it differently, if you look at like an amoeba that's expanding outward, and you try to pull in experiences in a measured, meted way that's gentle, as I call gentle challenges. And you can do that with your children too, so that they learn that in living life is about experiencing things. It's not about retreating all the time and going into a hole. It's the idea is to be able to gently grow outward. HSPs, I think, are more comfortable with gentle challenges more so than they are with these huge, grandiose, big challenges that sometimes can be very intimidating. Now, this doesn't account for high sensation seeking
Yeah.
HSPs because they're out there. But even HSPs, I think, could benefit from the same thing. And so when it's the analogy I have here is this, you think about taking a child to the deep end of the pool, you drop them in and say, sink or swim, see what happens. Of course, you traumatize the child in the process. But the idea is that's not doing it in a way that I think is going to create lasting learning about experiencing new things. So the idea would be these gentle challenges would be maybe taking them out a little bit further, holding on to them with you until they're comfortable, then move to the next level, and to move to the next level gently as they're ready for it, but always challenging them in a gentle way so that they realize that there is an end goal out there that may seem too big for them, but they will eventually realize they can do it and they can handle it because it's done in a very gentle and I think an HSP kind of way. So HSP boys need those challenges too. And they need to know that life is full of challenges, life is full of experiences, and some of those things are going to be things that sort of, challenge their comfort level. But the idea is that we want to keep doing that. A quick example, my son, very young son, I asked him when he was probably about 10 or 11 years old, what do you want to do as an activity? And he was a very shy boy. And he says, Dad, I want to be an actor. And I says, okay, well, I'm going to find you some acting classes. I was surprised, but, was ready to help him any way I could. I found a really great acting school. They specialized in kids. They worked with shy kids. I thought, oh, this is perfect. That was going to be his gentle challenge. I took him to the class the first day. He came out of it, he was white as a sheet. He was scared to death because he had gone through this thing that really kind of blew his mind. So we got home. When he got home, he didn't say anything till we got home. He got home, he started crying about it. He says, I can't do this. So I said, listen, I paid for 3 lessons. I said, why don't you go to the next one and the next one? And if you do that, if it's really too much, I'll take you out. But I said, if you do that, you will never have to go to another acting class again. And he did. He went back and he went back again. Now he came back and he said, Dad, this isn't for me. And I said, that's fine. That's not a failure. That was an experiment and trying something new and realizing, well, it's not what I thought it was. It's not for me. And that's the kind of thing that we need to teach our HSP boys, to try these things and let them, if it doesn't work out, that's fine. It was an experience that's taught them something about themselves.
That's amazing. I love, especially the way you talked about expanding our comfort zone or helping them to expand their comfort zone. And the last element there as well of just supporting them on that journey and being there with them and helping them develop the skills that they need to survive and thrive in the world, but also giving them a safe place to step back to if it does start to feel overwhelming or, just to be too much for them at that time. And so that's great. And I love that story you shared as well. Thank you. So the next point you had was celebrating their differences. And I'm just wondering what exactly that looks like in your experience.
Well, the feedback that highly sensitive boys and probably highly sensitive girls as well get from the general population is that they're different, and they're different in a bad way. And what we want to be able to do is let them know that that's who they are, and we need to celebrate those differences with them. I like to think of this as a gift. I mean, a lot of people have been talking about it as being a superpower and all that, and that's fine. But I look at it as a gift. It doesn't make us superior to anybody. It doesn't make us better than anybody else because we have that. It is a gift, and nature has uniquely crafted this with 20 to 30% of the human population. So the idea that celebrating the differences that they have is a way of helping encourage them to step out a little more into the world with this gift. And I think the important thing that comes out of that is that it allows them to go out and be who they are. They are their authentic and genuine self. And to me, that's what life is about, is being who you are, being the authentic and genuine you.
Mhm.
And by celebrating those differences, you're telling them you're okay, now be you. That's something I think is really important.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're absolutely right. Anything we can do with, for our children and also just the other people in our lives to help them tap into that authentic self and to feel free to express themselves in a way that feels authentic is fantastic. And so often just, when a child maybe tries to celebrate their difference in a crowd or express a difference in, their peer group, and they face some sort of rejection, that can almost be oh, well, that's not safe, I need to turn that part of myself off. And the way you're suggesting it, that idea of supporting them and celebrating their differences is, if they come home and tell you about that, you can debrief with them and explain, no, that's not a bad thing, you didn't do anything wrong, and that's actually a beautiful part of who you are. It may just be that that's not a safe place for you to express that, but with me and in this home always will be. Or like you talked about earlier with coaches or teachers, the way that they could even pay attention for those things and support kids in that and protect them in that sense of just giving them that permission to be their authentic selves and really fully engage. I think so often in our journeys, we can learn to turn that part off or turn it down in terms of self-expression. And so I'm with you in that anything we can do to help children celebrate their differences, especially HSP boys, to celebrate and enjoy and lean into those things that make them different. I think the permission giving aspect of that will create so many more dynamic and bold and unique leaders down the road. And so I love the way that you've explained that and approached that. And so the next thing related to that was the idea of teaching them confidence. And so what are some of the best ways to do that for HSP
Well,
boys?
I don't, of course, doing the previous one would be one way of starting that process. I don't think confidence is innate. I don't know if there is a confidence gene, but I think it's something that we learn through life. The people that are around us help feed us, whether or not we are going to be confident or not. And when I think of confidence, I'm not talking about cockiness or arrogance or pomposity or anything else. I'm talking about being okay with who you are, and mean walking with that confidence every time you go out into the world. You have that confidence with you. That's going to be something that at some point in their life they're going to get pushback. We all have,
Mhm.
about being sensitive. But if you're confident in who you are, you're not apologizing about anything that you're doing. You don't worry about whether people say things to you, and it doesn't rattle who you are. It
Mhm.
allows you to be exactly who you are. And I think it's something, especially for boys, to have confidence in themselves. Um, and especially because highly sensitive boys, like we've been highlighting throughout this discussion, uh, are perceived to be different.
Mhm.
That having that ability to carry that sort of confidence with you is something that's really, really, really important. And I think it's reinforcing the idea that they are who they are and they're important, and there's a reason for them being this way, sharing those kind of things. And also reinforcing the idea that going out into the world, uh, you can be more curious about things because you're more confident in your explorations. I mean, all these things kind of intertwine with each other, and they're interrelated in a lot of different ways. But this idea of being curious and being persistent, these are things that will also teach them confidence as well. So the idea is to get them out there, let them know that they can be who they are, and that life experience plus that reinforcement, I think, will be something that is sort of like a building a pyramid of confidence within that child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the elements or one of the thoughts that comes to mind with that is just helping them to feel comfortable in their own skin. Because I think for many of us, we go through this stage where we grow up and we're told maybe that there's something wrong with us, or we're different, or we're strange. And so we learn how to be who other people want us to be. And especially as highly sensitive people, we're good at reading the room and understanding this is what's expected of me, and kind of putting on that mask or fitting in that box that people have for us. And so this idea that you're communicating and sharing of giving them confidence to be themselves, to be comfortable in their own skin, to express themselves in whatever way comes naturally to them, and to be the most authentic version of who they are. I think that's incredible, and I love the way that you've shared that. So the next point you had was helping them understand their gifts, and so I'd love to hear what gifts in particular you're indicating there, and also just what that process looks like.
Well, all human beings have unique gifts. So we're all composed of unique genes and experiences and so forth, and they create unique individuals with unique gifts. But HSP boys have unique gifts as well, just like everybody else does. And they may have nothing to do with being highly sensitive. But what happens is, filtered through the HSP prism, there's these other gifts that they have that amplify the individual gifts that they have. Things like insight, intuition, this deep emotion and feeling,
Hmm.
the great empathy that we have, this ability for deeply diving in thought on particular things, and this inherent creativity that we have. And for sometimes for these children, like you said, you can walk in a room and you can pick up a vibe, and it just by being there.
Hmm.
Sometimes that could be confusing to a child, because they don't, why do I know that? How come I know that nobody else knows that?
Uh-huh.
And so that is part of that, taking their own unique individual talents and skills and traits, but amplifying it through the lens of an HSP person. So that can make things a little confusing. So that's where it's helpful to help them understand that some of the things they feel, some of the things they sense, some of the things they intuit, other people aren't going to see that. But there's
Hmm.
a reason why we have those gifts. And I like to think of it as like Dr. Aaron says and talks about a lot, is this evolutionary trait that we have.
Hmm.
20 or 30% of the population has. Nature has baked that in. So helping them understand that even their unique gifts filtered through their HSP lens is going to make something maybe a little more intense, and maybe make it a little more insightful. That's the kind of thing they need to understand too, because you can imagine going through life and not really understanding why I know this and why nobody else is seeing what I'm seeing. How come
Hmm.
nobody's feeling what I'm feeling? If you have that sort of basic understanding, especially when you're young, I think that makes moving into adulthood, when you're going to meet a wider range of people,
Yeah.
many of whom won't understand you, make it a little bit easier to do if you understand through the HSP lens that we see the world in.
That's awesome, and I love the list of gifts that you shared there. That's great. So the next point you had was about being emotionally supportive and nurturing, and we've touched on that a little bit, but I'd love for you to dive deeper into how HSP parents and role models can do that.
Well, the thing that stands out there is this idea of vantage sensitivity that highly sensitive people tend to have, and that's being able to, if we are raised, we live, experience life in a supportive and nurturing environment, we thrive. It's that simple. But it's more than just thriving. We thrive more than anyone else does in that kind of environment. Okay,
Mhm.
so you may have 10 people, 8 of which are non-HSPs and 2 are HSPs, and it's a wonderful, supportive, nurturing environment. The 2 HSPs are going to thrive, if you will, qualitatively more than the other 8. And that's
Mhm.
just how we're wired. Now, the opposite is true. If we're raised in a very poor environment, we're not supported, we're not loved, we're not nurtured, we go belly up, right?
Yeah.
We tank badly. So the idea is to make sure that you're raising your HSP boys in a very supportive, nurturing way, because it's the kind of the key to their happiness.
Yeah.
And you want them to be able to be in the right learning environment for all these other things, right? We're talking about now, so they'll take root. They won't if it's not the right environment. So this is why this is
Okay.
so important.
Awesome. That's great. So the next point you had made was don't question their masculinity. Can you explain that thought a little bit?
Yeah, for a lot of people, that might be a sticky wicket, but the idea is that a lot of boys are stood up as being little men. And obviously, the challenge to little boys is to present themselves as masculine as possible. And if you're HSP boy, like I was different in a lot of ways. That really was something that came out a lot from my own father, who would often say to me things like, "Are you a man or a mouse?" You know, if I was getting a little teary-eyed or something and I wasn't
Mhm.
handling it like a little man, that was the response that I got. And
Okay.
the implication underneath all that was, you're not being a man, and that's not good to be what you are. You should be more masculine.
Wow.
And again, this whole idea of masculinity and femininity as well, these are cultural constructs. This is stuff we
Mhm.
make up. You're not born with a roadmap on how to be a man, a masculine man, so to speak.
Yeah.
So these are things society creates. Those are things that can be changed. We live in a world now where gender roles are changing almost daily. And I'm talking about things like men are doing stuff that women traditionally did, and vice versa. Women are doing things men have traditionally done. A
Mhm.
lot of people are questioning the traditional gender identities. So this is a very fluid time, and I think it's a very good time for us to look at things like reshaping how we look at masculinity.
Yeah.
We very often rob our boys of the opportunity to express their full humanity because we say, no, you don't want to do that because that's a feminine thing.
Mhm.
If you cry, you're feminine. If you're being sensitive, you're being feminine. But that's not true. It's a human quality.
Yeah.
And we want our boys to be able to embrace their full humanity. And that's what this is about. So questioning masculinity in the traditional sense
Yeah.
is a way of really shutting your son down.
That's great. That's an awesome point. And I love the way you connected the words masculinity and humanity, and that idea that there are innate traits and aspects of who we are, like expressing emotions, that are just part of being human. And when we teach boys not to do that, we're actually teaching them to shut down a part of themselves, whether they're highly sensitive or not, but especially if they're highly sensitive. And I think that ultimately, maybe what we're seeing in our culture currently, some of the things that we see in terms of lack of empathy is from the idea that's been presented of this toxic masculinity, and the extremes of that. And I think the long-term effects of that are finally showing themselves, and we're hopefully moving back in the opposite direction of teaching our children to express themselves, and that it's okay to have emotions, and whatever emotions they have are fine, and being willing, like you said earlier, to support them and nurture those things and allow them to just express what they need to express, as opposed to teaching them to shut that part down, to stuff those feelings, or to isolate themselves and then come back when those emotions are over, which I believe is something that growing up with, I struggled with, was that idea of, oh, well, my emotions are too big, I need to keep them to myself. And then when I have that all figured out, I can come back. And, I've seen the way that played out in my own story was fairly devastating at times. And so I love the way that you've approached that. And especially, I think we could do a whole other interview on that. So I don't want to spend too much more time there, but that's your perspective there is incredible. And I appreciate you sharing that. Out of all these things, I think that's extremely meaningful as well. Okay, so the next point you had was thinking the trait is a disorder or a phase. And so how have you seen that maybe play out? And what can we do to change that or correct that misunderstanding?
Yeah. I sometimes think that, um, and this may be something that non-HSP parents who are raising an HSP child might think. I'm just guessing there, but it could also be
Mhm.
HSP parents as well. the idea that it's just a phase, they'll grow out of it. They're just kind of going through this little funky phase when they're young, and at some point it'll disappear and they'll turn into what I think they should be.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen. That child is going to be an HSP the rest of his life. And there's nothing you can do
Yeah.
to change that. Now they can mask things and act like they're not, but underneath it all, they're still highly sensitive. So it's not a phase. The other thing is some people look at this as being a disorder. You see people talk about, one of the things they do very often is confuse things like hypersensitivity, which is not high sensitivity, with this, or they may see an autistic child, maybe a medical professional, and say, or a highly sensitive child is very quiet, and call them autistic, and so forth and so on. That's kind of conflating and confusing the two things. And even in cases where you see where adults are talking about, and you see this a lot on the social media, where people are talking about depression, anxiety, as if they're natural aspects of high sensitivity. Now, that's not true. The idea is that high sensitivity, you may be highly sensitive and also be anxious. You may be highly sensitive and also depressed. And we do have a tendency to be prone to those kinds of things, but that's not high sensitivity.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to separate those two things. And very often people think, because they see some of these things like the overwhelm, or they see the emotional reactivity that we have, and they see that outward manifestation of the trait, and they think, oh my God, they've got a problem. Well, they don't. And I think this is one of the things we have to be careful with our children, especially, is you don't want to start saying to them things like, you'll grow out of this, when they never will, or that they've got some kind of a mental health issue, which you do not have.
Yeah.
So just because of the trait. So anyway, that's one of the reasons why it's very important that we don't get those things confused, especially with our children, because whatever you tell them when they're 4, 5, 6, and 7, before the prefrontal cortex develops and the critical thinking capability, everything goes in as truth. They don't care who's telling it. It doesn't matter if it's true or not. It goes in as truth. And that becomes what they believe very often later on in life about who they are.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think one of the interesting things that has come up for me a lot in discussions I've had is when you share with people that this is a genetic trait, the number of people who it takes a minute for that to sink in and for them to realize, oh, this isn't a disorder. It isn't something that's wrong with somebody. Or like you were saying here, it's not a phase. This is a genetic trait. It's how we're hardwired and how we've come into this world. And so when people realize that, I think a lot of times a light bulb comes on of, oh, so this isn't something I have to change. This isn't something that's wrong or weird. This is just my natural wiring. And if that's the case, I can embrace that, because like you're saying, it's not something that's going to change down the road. It's not something to overcome. The overstimulation side of things can present challenges, but there are also a lot of coping skills we can use to bring that under control. And then it's all the different gifts that come with it, like you were sharing earlier, that we can embrace and that we can learn to, put into practice and really, utilize in how we interact with the world. And so, but I agree, there's some misnomers and misinformation out there that sometimes we have to overcome in our discussions with other people before we can really, talk about embracing the gifts that come with the trait. So the last point you had was giving them their space. And I'm just curious what that's looked like in your journey and with your boys as well, along the way, what you
Well,
recommend there.
I think it's really important that we understand that highly sensitive people, boys, girls, males, men and women, we all need our space. We need some space to be by ourselves. And for a lot of people, that is really hard to understand. Why do you need to be alone? What do you do when you're alone? There's this curiosity as if we're on a conference call with everybody else that's HSP in the world, and we're plotting an overthrow or something because we have to be alone to do it. It has nothing to do with that. We just need time alone to process things. You think about how deeply we process emotions, feelings, thoughts, things that we're working on, problems, creativity issues, and so forth. These things require brain power to do it. And it's one of those things where if we can have space to ourselves where there's no distractions, we can allow our brain to kind of unwind through these things and allow us to process this information and settle ourselves down. So
Mhm.
HSP boys are just like that. I know when I was a kid, and of course I'm going to date myself, but this is before the internet, and we had encyclopedias, and I loved the World Book Encyclopedia. I'd take a volume out and go into my room, and I just read it from cover to cover. Sometimes I give myself tasks to do. Do the history of the English monarchy or something like that. And I'd
Um,
follow from, it's like, but it was something I did, and I enjoyed being by myself. Even to this day, I still feel that way. I enjoy my alone time. And a lot of people don't get that. But they think when a little boy is doing that, there's weird. He needs to be out playing. He needs to be outside doing this with his friends, et cetera, et cetera. And it is good that he does that, but it's also important to give him that space time. And he has to have a space to do it into. Don't, put him in a situation where he can't have that alone time, because he
yeah.
needs that. And if he's taught that it's okay to do that as he grows into an adult, he's not going to think twice about, hey, I've got to go I've got to go recharge.
Yeah.
I'm out of here for a while. So that's why it's important to make sure that they have that space so that they can do what HSPs do, which is this ability to be alone, process things, assimilate, recharge, revitalize, and come back out in the world again.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you explored that. And I think it's just essential to help people explain, understand, especially highly sensitive boys, but highly sensitive people in general, to understand that because we're processing so much more information than someone who's not highly sensitive, and taking in so much data from the world around us, there is that need to unplug and recharge because our batteries run down faster. And so to work that into our routines and our schedules, and just to watch for those yellow alerts or red flags that start to come up when we've pushed too far or too hard, and to learn from those experiences how to pace ourselves so that we're able to show up at our best as often as possible, because we've learned when we need to take that step back and recharge. And like you said, just giving them permission and teaching them to give themselves permission, especially for future relationships and situations, even in their careers, where they realize, no, it's okay, and I need to do this, and this is okay for me to do because it's part of how I'm wired. And if I want to show up at my best, I've got to make time for this and take care of myself to recharge that battery, and then I can show up 100% when I'm back in with these other people or in these situations. So I love that you included that in your list, because it is such an essential lesson. And I just again want to thank you for being a part of the summit, for sharing your wisdom, much of it hard won, I'm sure, but also just so many great lessons and illustrations. I think I'll just have to keep coming back and revisiting this again and again, because there's so many great points that you've made. Before I let you go, I was wondering if you would share with us, where's the best place for people to connect with you and to learn more about the amazing work that you're doing?
Oh, thank you. Probably the best place, the most centralized place, is my website, thesensitiveman.com.
Okay.
You can read blogs there. I've got links to the men's group. I've got other links to other places. The books can be purchased off of that. So it's sort of my hub. And it also has links to my social media as well. So
Okay.
that's probably the best starting point.
Awesome. Well, we'll definitely include some links on this page as well for people to scroll down and find to connect with you. But again, I just want to thank you for sharing your time, sharing your wisdom, and the amazing work that you're doing. And I can't wait to continue to follow along with you on this journey and see what comes next for you along the way. So thank you. And thank you for everyone who's joined us for this session. And be sure to reach out to William and dive deeper into his work, explore his blog and his books. There's so much more value there, although we hope that this has been incredibly valuable for you as well. So with that, we will wrap up this session, and I hope to see everyone in the next one. Thanks.